What a joy it is to meet you yet again in this fashion. And today I thought I will share a little bit about the topic, the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Shall we just look into a few verses from Luke chapter 18, verses 15 to 17. Allow me to read that for you. And let's take that right away. I'm reading from the New International Version. People were also bringing babies to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. When the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. But Jesus called the children to him and said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." What is fascinating to see about the life and ministry of Jesus when he walked the earth 2,000 years ago was the way Jesus' disciples responded to Jesus or to the ministry of their guru. And oftentimes the way disciples talked or requested something from Jesus or behaved in a particular manner only revealed of how little clarity they had about the teaching and the person of Jesus. Jesus had to really teach them over and over again on who he really was and why he actually came to planet Earth. And the disciples were simply not getting it. They, took a long time. In fact, all the way in those 3.5 years that they were around with Jesus, they did not get that Jesus is the Messiah, right? Till the time he resurrected and revealed himself to them. The disciples were human beings just like you and me. Sometimes I used to wonder a lot more early on when I was a new follower of Jesus that, man, if I was like a person alive back in the day when Jesus was walking the earth, by looking at all that Jesus was doing right in front of my eyes, I probably would have been a much more stronger follower of Jesus because, I will see all the dramatic healings Jesus was doing, and of course my faith would be so strong. I would think like that. But you know what? The more I read the Bible, the more I observe myself, I think I'm not very different than the disciples that Jesus had, in the sense that even though Jesus did some amazing, miraculous things in and around the lives of his disciples, they did not always have faith in Jesus. They were gripped with fear, and sometimes their behavior and their attitudes was much like any other worldly person who wasn't following Jesus. And honestly, I find that in my own life. God works in my life so beautifully so many times, and yet I forget those workings of Jesus in my life in the past, and I get worried about my present circumstances, forgetting what I learned the previous time, and I behave exactly like the disciples of the times of Jesus, the 12 disciples. And I'm like, wow, man, how could I forget so easily? And many times my attitude, my behavior, my responses to the world's pressure is not reflecting a strong, deep biblical worldview. And you and I have to be conscious of this, that we have a lens through which we see everything. Let me unpack these 3 verses. And, it's important that we see this in the light of, what I'm trying to share with you today. Even in the days of Jesus, the disciples of Jesus were influenced by a worldview that was very popular among professional context. Greek scholars or the gurus of those days often were very conscious of their public image, how they look like, how they present themselves, how they teach, the amount of money they would charge to give a discourse. All of this was a reality, much like today's time. Paul later on, he had to confront the superlative apostles, not really the apostles, but he had to confront the church at Corinth about the superlative apostles because those guys were professionals. And Paul wasn't, in that sense that he wasn't charging people and he wasn't branding himself. Talking about branding, let me tell you, you and I are surrounded by a culture today, by a world today that overemphasizes the importance of personal branding. And I know the more I read this particular passage from chapter 18 of Luke, verses 15 to 17, the more I'm convinced that the disciples were particularly wanting to guard the public appearance of Jesus. They were trying to brand Jesus as being extremely important, that he did not have time for the little children. Why would you want a big man in the society to waste his time with little children? In fact, in the culture back then, children were not really important. It was inappropriate for any important person in society to waste their time with little kids because they're not really breadwinners or people who contribute to anything in society, and they were considered, not as important as the adults. Now, Jesus is not, giving a blanket statement saying that all children are perfect. The Old Testament, the Bible, if you read the Bible cover to cover, the Bible never really talks about children being inherently, pure, but their hearts are pure. They're innocent. There is something about children, their simplicity, their ability to just trust, their ability to not be influenced by the cunning world out there. Jesus was pointing out to something far more significant when he thinks about children. Children were, humble. They were defenseless. They were in contrast to all the people around them, the adults around them, who always were, worried about their own self-advancement or self-proclamation or their own self-righteousness. Children were pure in their hearts in that sense, that even though they were not perfect, they were pure in their hearts. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. And Jesus seizes that moment to bring a teaching to his own disciples. He says, hey, don't rebuke them. Let the little children come to me. The parents were bringing both the babies and, infants and children. You read that carefully, you see little kids who were carried by parents, and also there were children who were handheld, and the parents were bringing them to Jesus. And the disciples were trying to rebuke them, send them away, and shoo them away. And actually, Jesus was correcting their worldview by saying, you know what? Personal branding is not important. In fact, I want you to know, my disciples, that these little children reflect the very heart of my kingdom. The kingdom of God, in fact, belongs to little ones like this. Unless you become like a little child, you can never enter into my kingdom. What a profound statement that is. We live in a culture where social media has turned us to become our own little brand managers. Don't we do that? We post best pictures of ourselves. We try to show off. We try to be somebody we probably are not. And today's ministers, not all of them, there are many out there who are amazing people. I have a lot of respect for many, many amazing people there. But I wonder how many ministers of the gospel today are simply sustaining their ministry by techniques of marketing, branding, and reinforcing their own personal public image. Do we enter God's kingdom like that? Is that what it takes to experience the kingdom of God? Jesus actually has a completely different understanding of that. Jesus says, you just have to be honest. You just have to come to me like little kids run to their parents. I have 3 kids, and even now, but more so when they were much littler, much more younger, they would not worry about their school fees. They don't need to worry about, they, with all their naughtiness, with all their weaknesses, they had that childlike faith and love towards their parents. Their parents will somehow take care of that. That is what Jesus wants from you and me. A simple childlikeness, not childishness, but childlikeness, where our heart is tender, that we just come to God just as we are and throw ourselves in the bosom of God. You know why? Because when we do that, God will never shoo us away. In fact, the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. And no wonder He uses that as an illustration to His own disciples. So if you're a follower of Jesus, hey, stop branding yourself. Stop trying to externally work at your portfolio, but work on the inside. Come to God just the way you are. I want to come to God just the way I am, because at the end of the day, that is what matters. God bless you.